You may wish to settle back now, letting the weight of the day soften. Tonight, we travel far back in time, to an age of stone streets and wooden shutters, of quiet fields and tolling bells, to the heart of the medieval world. The air carries the faint scent of wood smoke, a distant church bell marks the hour, and the low murmur of voices drifts through narrow lanes. It is a time when the pace of life is set not by clocks or machines, but by the slow turning of the seasons, by the rising and setting of the sun. But this is also a time touched by a shadow, a quiet, almost unseen presence that would reshape the lives of millions. The Black Death. In the history books, it is described in numbers, in maps, in dates. But tonight, we will not rush through lists or battles. We will walk slowly, barefoot across the earth of that time, pausing to feel the textures of daily life. We will listen to the voices of ordinary men and women, the blacksmith tending his forge, the mother stirring a pot of thick barley stew, the shepherd watching over a small flock at dusk, and we will hear softly the way their days began to change. This is not the story of the plague told in fear, but in quiet detail, the untold human stories, the rhythms of life that persisted even as the shadow lengthened. You may imagine yourself now, stepping into that world, a world of candlelight and cloister gardens, where the air is heavy with the scent of rosemary and damp earth after rain. And so, we begin. The year is 1347. In a small village in the heart of Europe, the day begins not with the blare of alarms, but with the gentle light of dawn slipping between the slats of wooden shutters. A rooster calls out, clear and insistent, and somewhere a dog stretches in the cool morning air. You may picture the village as a cluster of timber-framed houses, their walls of wattle and daub painted in pale earth tones, their thatched roofs damp with early dew. The ground is uneven underfoot, packed dirt softened by last night's rain. In the center stands the market square, little more than an open space, where a stone well waits to give the morning water. Life, here, moves with a measured rhythm. The baker has risen before the first hint of light, his small oven glowing faintly in the dim kitchen. The smell of fresh bread, heavy and warm, drifts down the lane, mingling with the scent of hay from the stables. In the fields beyond the village, men and women begin their walk to work. The earth is dark and rich beneath their boots, the breath of cattle steaming faintly in the cool air. The sound of iron striking iron rings out from the forge, steady, deliberate, where the blacksmith shapes hinges and nails, his hands darkened with soot. It is an age without rush. The day stretches open, and each task is given the time it needs. A woman might spend the morning spinning wool beside the hearth, her spindle turning slowly between her fingers, the thread coiling into a neat skein. Children gather kindling, feed the chickens or watch over younger siblings, their laughter rising and falling in the air like the flutter of birds. You might imagine, too, the little church at the edge of the village. Its walls are thick, its single bell hung from a simple wooden frame. Inside, the light falls in long thin beams through tiny windows, catching the dust that drifts in the air. The smell of beeswax candles is faint but warm. In the towns and cities, the day holds a different rhythm. There, the streets are narrow and crowded, the buildings taller, their upper stories leaning out above the lanes. The cries of merchants mix with the creak of wagon wheels, and the smells are more varied. Spices from the east, fish from the river, smoke from dozens of hearths. Here, too, life flows steadily, the apprentice learning his trade, the scribe bent over his parchment, the washerwoman at the riverbank beating linen against smooth stones. Yet, in both town and countryside, the same small signs are beginning to appear. A traveler arrives from a distant port, coughing softly. A market stall stands empty, its owner unwell. And though no one yet names it aloud, the shadow of the Black Death is already moving along the roads and rivers. But for now, the rhythm holds. The sun climbs, the fields hum with the sound of bees, and in kitchens across the land, cauldrons bubble gently. The medieval day carries on. Slow, deliberate, shaped by hands that have known this same pattern for generations. And as evening approaches, the light softens to gold. Shadows grow long across the furrows. In the market square, the last of the bread is sold, and the well rope creaks one final time before night. Families gather near their hearths, the warmth seeping into their bones, the flicker of firelight casting soft shapes on the walls. Outside, the sky deepens to a velvet blue, and 1,000 stars prick the darkness. This is the world into which the Black Death would come. Not all at once, but quietly, folding itself into the familiar patterns of life until those patterns began to change forever. The year drifts forward. In the autumn of 1347, whispers travel faster than the wind. Along the coasts of the Mediterranean, sailors speak of a strange illness arriving on ships from the east. The news is soft, uncertain, a merchant's tale told over wine, a rumor repeated at a market stall. Many dismiss it. Illnesses come and go. Winter will pass, as it always does. But in a quiet port city, perhaps Messina, on the island of Sicily, the first real signs appear. Ships glide into the harbor, their sails heavy and weathered from long weeks at sea. They should bring goods and letters, silks and spices. Yet something feels different. The air is still. Dock workers move hesitantly toward the gangplanks, their voices low. Some sailors remain slumped against the railings. their faces pale, their breathing shallow. Others lie below deck, unmoving. The townspeople cannot yet see the invisible thread that connects this scene to so many other corners of Europe. But that thread has already been woven. In a small inland village, far from the port, life continues. A family gathers at their table, a wooden board resting across two trestles. The father, a tanner by trade, speaks of the week's work, hides soaked in vats, the sharp scent of oak, bark, and lime. The mother ladles out pottage, a thick, comforting mixture of grains and vegetables, into simple earthen bowls. Their eldest daughter listens, a spindle turning slowly in her hands, while the younger son fidgets on the bench, eager to finish his chores and run outside before the light fades. They have heard, faintly, of trouble in the southern cities, but such things feel far away. And yet, along the roads, the story is already moving. A friar, brown-robed and barefooted, walks slowly from village to village, carrying a small satchel of parchment and ink. He offers prayers, hears confessions, and passes along the news he has heard. His voice is steady, but the words he carries grow heavier with each retelling. In the towns, some have begun to shutter their shops. In the ports, certain ships are turned away. Still, the pace of change feels uneven. In one place, laughter rings out in the market as if nothing has altered. In another, the streets are quiet, the air cool and still, as though holding its breath. You may picture now a merchant named Thomas, living in a busy riverside city in England. His days are filled with the creak of cartwheels and the clink of coins. He trades in wool, heavy bales brought in from the countryside, destined for looms and dyers. One morning, a cart from a neighboring town arrives late. The driver's face is pale, and his voice thin. He speaks little, simply unloading his cargo before leaving quickly. Thomas notices but says nothing. There is work to be done. A week later, the same driver does not return. Another man brings the goods instead, explaining, with a quiet shake of the head, that the driver has taken ill. It is said without drama, without panic. People in medieval towns are used to illness, fevers, chills, coughs. Life goes on, yet the pattern is changing. The friar's travels bring him to Thomas's city, and his news is no longer just rumor. He speaks of entire streets closed to visitors, of ships in the harbors sitting untouched, their crews gone. The illness, he says softly, does not fade with the change of seasons. And so the story spreads not only through bodies but through words. From the ports to the river towns, from the river towns to the villages, the rhythm of daily life begins to shift. Markets grow quieter. Journeys are delayed. A traveler arriving at a city gate may be turned away, told to wait beyond the walls. Still, in many homes, the warmth of the hearth glows. Children chase each other through the lanes. Farmers lead oxen to the fields. The church bells still ring for matins, for vespers, for weddings and baptisms. It is this weaving together, the familiar and the unfamiliar, the constant and the changing, that shapes the human story of the Black Death. By the spring of 1348, the shadow has grown longer. In London, in Paris, in Florence, and in countless small places with no names recorded in the chronicles, the illness is known, but alongside it so too is life. Stubborn, steady, carrying on in whatever ways it can. For in every age, even in the midst of uncertainty, there are mornings when the bread still bakes, the fields still green, and the sun still rises over stone walls and thatched roofs. And this is how the Black Death arrived, not as a single shattering moment, but as a slow tide, moving from shore to shore, touching lives in quiet, uneven waves. In the medieval mind, the world was a great tapestry, every thread woven by a divine hand, every pattern holding meaning. When illness swept through a town, it was not simply a matter for the physician's herbs and the apothecary's jars. It was also a question for the soul, for the stars, for the unseen currents that shaped human life. The people of the 14th century lived in a world filled with signs and portents. The phases of the moon, the color of the dawn sky, the flight of birds, all could carry messages. So, when the Black Death began to move across Europe, it stirred not only fear, but deep searching for why. You may imagine, in a small parish church, a group of townsfolk gathered around their priest. The flicker of candles softens the lines of their faces. Some have heard that the illness is a punishment, sent for the sins of humankind. Others believe it is a test, a way for the faithful to prove their devotion. The priest speaks quietly, urging prayer, penance, and acts of charity. In other places, voices tell a different tale. Astrologers, gazing into the night sky, speak of an unusual alignment of planets in the year 1345. Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, they say, stood together in the sign of Aquarius, a rare and potent meeting. To some, this cosmic event stirred the very air, corrupting it, carrying sickness on the wind. In the bustling heart of a city, the apothecary works in his dimly lit shop. Jars of powdered herbs line the shelves. Sage, rosemary, hyssop, lavender. He prepares small pouches of fragrant mixtures, to be worn close to the body. These pomanders are thought to purify the air around the wearer, for many believe the plague travels through miasma, bad or poisoned air, thick and invisible. Along the roads, you might see travelers holding sprigs of herbs to their noses, or wearing garlands of flowers, not just for beauty but for protection. In the countryside, smoke from fires is believed to cleanse the air. Villagers burn damp straw or fragrant wood, letting the smoke curl slowly into the rafters of their homes. And then there are the quiet charms and tokens carried in pockets or hung above doorways. A small cross carved from wood, a scrap of parchment inscribed with a verse from the Psalms, a polished stone believed to hold protective power. In a time before the germ theory of disease, such tokens are part of the fabric of daily life, as real and as valued as bread or water. Some practices are more solemn. In towns and cities, processions wind slowly through the streets, lines of men, some barefooted, some carrying heavy wooden crosses, singing hymns in low, steady voices. These are the flagellants who believe the illness can be turned aside by public acts of penance and devotion. Their chanting echoes between the stone walls, mingling with the toll of church bells. But not all signs are of sorrow. In certain villages untouched by the illness, festivals still go on. Dancers circle in the village green, their steps light in the summer dusk, believing that joy itself is a kind of protection. Perhaps most mysterious of all are the quiet stories told by firelight. A shepherd might speak of strange lights seen in the sky. A fisherman might tell of the sea turning an odd shade before a storm. These tales carry no proof, only the weight of repetition, and in the medieval world, that is enough to weave them into the greatest story of the age. The beliefs surrounding the Black Death are as varied as the lands it touched. Some saw the hand of God, others the influence of the stars, others still the stirring of ancient forces beneath the earth. And through it all, daily life continued. Prayers said at dawn, bread baked at noon, fields tended at dusk, each act carrying its own quiet hope. The medieval world did not divide life into the physical and the spiritual the way we often do now. Illness, weather, dreams, and omens all flowed together into one continuous stream of meaning. And so, the mysteries of the Black Death were never only about sickness. They were about the human need to understand, to find a place for even the darkest events in the great unending pattern of the world. The Black Death did not pass through a single door. It crossed all thresholds. From the grand halls of stone-built castles to the low wooden cottages of the countryside, it found its way into every layer of society. Yet the experience of those days was shaped deeply by where and how one lived. In the high, echoing chambers of a noble estate, the rhythms of life were wrapped in ceremony. Tapestries hung heavy on the walls, their woven threads telling stories of hunts and battles. Servants moved softly across flagstone floors, carrying trays of bread and wine, tending to the great fires that burned in the hearths. When news of the illness reached such halls, it often came through letters sealed in wax or whispered by trusted messengers. Nobles could withdraw to their country estates, away from the busier towns, hoping that distance might keep them safe. They might surround themselves with a smaller household, dismissing some servants to limit contact, and rely on stored provisions from their own lands. Still, the shadow could not always be kept out. Traveling musicians, visiting priests, or guests from other manors brought not only stories, but sometimes the sickness itself. And when it came, the great stone walls offered no more protection than the timber walls of a village home. In the crowded towns, life was closer, busier, noisier. Stone and timber houses leaned toward each other over narrow lanes, their upper floors casting shade over the street below. The air was full of the smells of baking bread, brewing ale, curing leather, and, at times, less pleasant scents from the refuse tossed into the gutters. Merchants and craftsmen lived by the steady exchange of goods. The market square was the beating heart of their days. But when the plague came, the rhythm faltered. Stalls stood empty, journeys to fetch goods from other towns grew rare. Some households closed their shutters and waited, while others continued to work as long as they could. For coins were still needed, and life's small necessities could not be delayed forever. For townsfolk, the closeness that once made trade and friendship easy now carried a new weight. Every handshake, every shared cup, every crowded church service brought a quiet, unspoken question. Was the sickness here? Out in the countryside, the peasants' world was wider in space but narrower in choice. Their days began and ended with the work of the land, plowing, sowing, tending animals, gathering firewood. The village formed the center of their lives, with the church, the well, and the green as its gathering places. When the plague came, some villages were untouched for weeks, even months, their isolation serving as an invisible shield. Others were reached quickly, through a traveling peddler, a passing cart, or a returning relative. For peasants, avoiding the illness often meant avoiding the market, which could also mean less salt for preserving food, fewer tools, and fewer news from the wider world. Yet the fields still needed care. For life in the countryside could not pause entirely. The sheep still grazed. The grain still ripened in the sun. The seasons still turned. Though their circumstances were different, all levels of society shared certain things. All heard the church bells tolling more often than before. All felt the subtle shifts in the air, the absence of certain familiar faces, the quiet streets, the smaller gatherings. All knew the feeling of wondering what the next season might bring. In noble halls, in busy towns, In quiet villages, families gathered in the glow of firelight at night. Meals were eaten together, whether from silver plates or wooden trenchers, and prayers were spoken for health, for the harvest, for peace. The pace of life slowed in places, yet the simple acts of care, a neighbor leaving bread at a door, a friend sharing herbs for a remedy, carried on. In this way, the Black Death became not only a story of loss, but also of connection, for all its differences. Medieval society was bound together by the same threads: the turning of the seasons, the need for food and shelter, the comfort of faith, and the warmth of human kindness. And so, even as the shadow passed over castles, towns, and fields, the heartbeat of daily life, slower, softer, but still steady, continued. The people of that time, in all their varied places, lived within the same long story. A story we can still hear, if we listen closely enough. And so, the Black Death passed, as all seasons eventually do. Its shadow left marks upon stone and parchment, upon memory and song. Yet life, quiet and persistent, returned to the lanes, the fields, and the halls. The bells still rang in the morning, bread still baked in the ovens. Children still laughed in the warm light of summer. History remembers the loss, but it also holds the resilience, the steady hands, the shared meals, the kindness passed from one to another. As we leave this world of candlelight and cobblestone behind, you may imagine the stars above those medieval nights, the same stars that shine above us now, soft, constant, watching the slow turning of the world. And in that stillness, the story rests.